But right now, it is time to, say kia ora, welcome in to Hayden Donnell, and I guess, are we going to start with the election?
No, I'm going with the biggest story of the week this time, Mark. Not the election. I'm talking about the alleged desecration of the hallowed Ranfurly Shield by partying Hawke's Bay rugby players. That is the absolute blockbuster that I'm going to begin with, and I'm not alone in giving this story the prominence it deserves. This was the lead story on the news at 5 p.m. on Monday's episode of RNZ Checkpoint.
Yeah.
New Zealand Rugby says it hasn't contemplated drug testing the Ranfurly Shield after social media images emerged of a white substance and a rolled-up banknote on the trophy amid Hawke's Bay celebrations over the weekend.
Now, that story was not just the lead on the news, it was also at the top of the agenda once the show itself began. So here's the host, presenter Susana Leatawa, introducing the show itself.
This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Susana Leatawa. E haere aki nei, coming up, deeply disappointed, New Zealand Rugby launches an investigation into the antics of the Ranfurly Shield winning Hawke's Bay side. We ask the union CEO if players were snorting drugs off the famous log of wood.
So did Susana follow through on that promise? Did she ask the question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost insulting that you'd even have to ask the question. This is a rigorous journalist that we're dealing with here, sometime host of RNZ Nights, fill-in host when you're not around, Mark. She absolutely did put that question to the Hawke's Bay rugby boss, Jay Campbell. Here she is putting it.
Were players snorting cocaine off the Shield?
Look, I guess in terms of those social media images that are circulating around, NZR have opened an investigation, and Hawke's Bay Rugby Union are supporting them 100% as we try and work through kind of what's fact and what's fiction.
Sharp intake of breath from Jay.
It was, wasn't it?
At that question. You could see him going through all the permutations, so you can almost sense it of his answer there. Now, I have to confess that at this stage, I did feel all but sure that the white powder in question was, in fact, a drug of some description on the old log of wood. But the following day, a new twist in the tale emerged.
Now, this is the revelation. Now, I have to say, Hayden, that the revelation was on Monday night.
Oh, so was it actually on nights?
On Monday night?
I wasn't
Monday
listening
evening?
in. So
Yeah,
I've credited
you missed
stuff
it.
with this breaking news story.
Stuff, there are hours behind us.
So you got James Dwan.
James was a character who met Muhammad Ali, I'll have you say, in the street in Sydney at one stage as well. But nonetheless, he was quite sure that he was responsible for the white powder because it was plaster of Paris that he had used to put the Ranfurly Shield back together again when it was restored the last time, which was just a few months ago.
Yeah, it's
and he
always
says the dust was from that. I'm pretty sure that it's what it was.
You find that explanation is credible.
James is an honest man. He's a silversmith from Waikanae. You know, he wouldn't put me wrong.
You're absolutely buying that 100%.
Mr.
You're
Nice Guy
swallowing
here.
that one hook, line, and sinker. You're snorting that straight off the Shield. Sorry,
I'm blowing it.
What
I'm
do you
not
think about?
snorting,
Why was the rolled up banknote there? But look, it's a likely story. I'll accept it. If you think that that's the case, then that's what it's a Mark Leishman approved tale there.
Yep.
Also, I don't want to cast aspersions on James's craftsmanship or anything, but he strengthened it. It's an oak shield. He strengthened it with plaster of Paris. And it's broken clean in half after being apparently dropped on a kitchen floor.
Yeah. Well, he did offer to put a bronze sort of piece of metal through the middle, but the rugby union said that was too expensive.
Right, so he had to do plaster of Paris. Well, apparently it can break after being dropped on a floor. Some of these explanations, I hope that the investigation by NZ Rugby really gets to the bottom of this, because I feel like there's more to come on this story, to be honest.
It could be, yes, there's more to it. Was all the effort worthwhile?
The media has put in a lot on this story. I feel like this is the greatest dissection of a night of inebriated frivolity since Boris Johnson's lockdown parties. I've gone forensic on it. Whether it was all worthwhile, opinions do vary, because, I mean, not everyone does seem to care that much about this story, at least going by this classic vox pop put together by Felix Walton for RNZ's Checkpoint.
That's the disrespecting the Shield.
Silly buggers. Naughty, 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 bad, bad boys.
They must have been a bit drunk, eh?
They must have had a bit too much beers, eh?
I mean, I think it's kind of funny. I know there's tradition and stuff, but end of the day, it's a game.
Now, that wasn't the only kind of funny Ranfurly Shield story out there this week. Several people on social media, or Ranfurly Shield content, should I say, several people on social media weighed in with their own stories, which may indicate that despite its storied history, the log of wood hasn't always been treated with the utmost reverence. So among those telling the story was the former radio announcer for the hits, Emma Hallur, who said she was once charged with taking care of the Shield at a promo event, and at the end of the promo event, no one came to claim it, and so she thought, well, what should I do? I'll just take it home. She had a couple of drinks with the Ranfurly Shield sitting on her mantelpiece. She proved this wasn't just a tall tale. She had a picture of it on her mantelpiece. Several people replied to her with their own photos of them mishandling this supposedly sacred shield. So I think that it's been around the traps a little bit. It hasn't always been taken care of, hasn't always been treated as sacred. But some commentators weren't so sanguine about the shield being treated in this manner. The aforementioned James Dwan, he wanted to put a stop to this kind of silly business. He proposed a solution on One News. This is it.
Whoever holds the shield, it needs to have a guardian of the shield. Doesn't go anywhere without him.
Basically a bodyguard for the shield. Someone that accompanies it. Did he tell that to you as well?
He did. He suggested back in the day in Auckland had the shield, Peter Fatialofa, the great Samoan front rower. He was the guardian, and no one came near the shield if he didn't want you to.
Did he have the shield on his body at all times?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure he used it as a shield, but he carried it around and just kept an eye on it.
Okay, so it's an appointed guardian of the shield.
Basically.
You're just sworn to protect it with your life, sort of thing. Yeah. I get it. I mean, fair enough. Yeah, someone that keeps an eye out for it, I can understand. But whether it's a full-time responsibility, I'm not sure that we have the money for that.
No.
Sports commentator Scotty Stevenson, another person that was very upset, did not see the funny side of things in this. And here he is chatting to News Talk ZB's Heather Duplessis-Allen.
To see a group this stupid, this thoughtless, and this careless in charge of something that has this much mana, and frankly the posts laughing about the situation, and again, as I said, maybe doing much worse with the broken Ranfurly Shield, frankly just makes me angry, and I'm emotional about it. I think it is a disgrace.
There you go.
So yes, and exactly, consider yourself rebuffed Hawke's Bay rugby union players at not quite the level of objective remove and sense of humour about the situation that was displayed in the classic RNZ's Vox Pops.
We had a text in the Ranfurly Shield saga rugby, a game of two halves.
Oof.
Had to say it.
Sharp intake of breath from me there. I would never presume to disrespect the Shield in such a manner.
No.
But of course I respect all views.
Anyway, if everyone, can't see the humour in the story, it has been a bit of a welcome break, the Ranfurly Shield, from the election.
Yeah, just an oasis in a desert, really, of election content. No one seems to be in. Everyone's getting tetchy about the election. There's angry accusations and claims being fired back and forth, and no one's happy. And some people are having a really tough time of it, none more so than Winston Peters and Jack Tame, who duked it out in a very bruising encounter in the octagon of debate known as the Q&A studio this Sunday. And this was a really fiery interview, euphemistic, really. It mostly consisted of Peters being tested by incisive and well-researched questions and responding by lashing out with insults and recriminations. And one political reporter, intrepid political reporter, AAP's Ben Mackay, actually catalogued all the insults that Peters levelled at Tame. And I think this is actually in order of least favourite to favourite for Ben Mackay. So all the insults, they were arrogant, liar, vindictive, waste of taxpayers' money and viewers' time, corrupt, I'll say that again. Corrupt, lousy, woke fellow traveller, smart aleck. I quite like smart aleck. Philadelphia lawyer. That's an oldie but a goodie.
Oh, yeah.
Muckraker. That absolutely rolls off the tongue. I love to call people muckraker.
Yeah.
Muckraker Mark.
Yeah.
I could call you.
That's right.
You're a muckraker Mark rolls off the tongue.
That's me, to a T.
And Ben's favourite was dirt merchant.
Yeah. Pond scum would have been a good one. That would
Yeah,
have been
well, we can probably put those. You can jot those down for Winston for the next
later.
Q&A.
Yeah.
encounter.
Insults are nothing new, are they, for Winston, though? I mean, it's been pretty much his stock and trade, hasn't it, when it comes to journalists particularly?
No, and several people have noted that, and his antagonistic stance, they say, is something of a tactic. Wow, who would have thought? Now, Jack Tame himself actually said that during the interview. This is what he said.
I think we all understand the tactic. You come in here, you huff and puff and hurl insults around. I get it. For people at home, it might be entertaining. These are serious times worthy of serious leadership. If you are unable to answer straight questions about your policy, your competence and your integrity, that's on you.
So that was a very stern rebuff from his retort, I guess, to Winston Peters from Jack Tame. And others did dredge up other information about this tactic. There was an article by TVNZ's John Campbell last month where he described a conversation he had with Peters during, after a particularly antagonistic interview around 25 years ago. And apparently in the space of an ad break or half an ad break, Peters explained to John Campbell that the more he seemed at odds with the mainstream media, the more his voters liked him. So John Campbell had a bit of an epiphany at this. He realised that this oppositional interview conferred upon him the status of an outsider, a maverick, a whistleblower, someone speaking truth to power. And so ever since then, every time he's seen or heard Winston Peters being interviewed, he's suspected that he's speaking over the head of his interviewer directly to those who see him as their man, anti-establishment, anti-all establishments, the politician you trust when you don't trust politicians. And a lot of that was John Campbell's words, not my own, if they sounded very eloquent. But basically, the insults and recriminations can be seen in that light. So I think in this case, there were times Peters seemed genuinely rattled, moments where he pushed the friction a bit far and probably further than even he was wanting to do.
So this is when he hinted at interfering in TVNZ's operations.
Yeah, there was actually not one but two sort of implied threats to TVNZ's editorial independence in this interview. And I'll just play one of them. This is the last of them, but it ended the interview.
You have railed against co-governance.
Thank you, Jack. You just made a hopeless case here.
You've railed against co-governance.
For us to make sure we get the broadcasting portfolio after this election.
Is that a threat, Mr. Peters?
No, it's not a threat. It's a promise that you're going to have an operation that's much more improved than what it is now. It's just an idea.
Thank you for your time. Good luck in the campaign.
Yeah, well, I believe that, Jack, like I believe half the other bulldust you just said.
New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters.
There he is.
Well.
Now, so that is a bit of a threat, you'd have to say. He was very displeased with how that interview went. He threatened to improve TVNZ's operations, which I imagine would involve having fewer of these bulldust-filled interviews, I guess. And that's a bit reminiscent of an earlier Q&A interview, maybe I think it was late last year, December last year, with Broadcasting Minister Willie Jackson, where he told Tame, "You're doing a very negative interview today. I'm very disappointed in you." And he spoke about Tame's so-called national mates, among other things. And those comments, they were also highly ill-advised given Jackson's position as Broadcasting Minister. But I'll note that Tame did afterward tell News Talk ZB he's friendly with Jackson and he took the comments as a joke. Peters, on the other hand, didn't seem as comical. He described his threat as a promise. I don't think Jack Tame has seen too much humour in them.
It seems somewhat reminiscent of going back a long way to Rob Muldoon and Simon Walker and those sorts of interviews. Brian Edwards, I think, would have had a bit of a clash or two with Muldoon.
Mark, I'm 38, my friend, but
some will remember.
Some will remember.
Those were the days, and I think Winston Peters has taken a few leaves out of Rob
probably.
Muldoon's book.
Well, wasn't he mentored by?
Yeah, well,
Muldoon?
he was in the very early days. Yeah, 1974. Because he's been in there since 75.
He's been in there a little while.
A long way.
Yeah.
Anyway, what really got him racked up, if you like, worked up about this interview?
Yeah, I think Tame's questions and overall preparedness, he's just a very good political interviewer. He's been really good this election. But it made it difficult for him to retreat into his usual antagonism and bluster. And there's actually a tactic that Tame uses, and I've noticed this in multiple interviews, where he asks for a figure. Usually it's a very basic figure, it's a figure underlying a policy. The interviewee will usually fail to provide that figure, and then Jack Tame will helpfully deliver the figure in question. So here he is employing this tactic on National's finance spokesperson Nicola Willis.
I'm just doing the maths, okay? So, in 2018, before the foreign buyer ban was lifted, how many purchases, as a percentage of overall purchases in New Zealand, did foreign buyers represent?
I don't have that number right now.
Okay, I do. It's 3%, right?
No worries, I've got it for you. Don't worry, Nicola. No, that was him interrogating the feasibility or otherwise of National's foreign buyers tax. Yes. And he would go on to say he was a bit incredulous at some of the projections being made by the party. And he had those numbers in front of him. The same device was employed multiple times in his interview with Winston Peters. So here's the first time on New Zealand First's apparent policy to build a separate prison for gang members.
So how many people will it hold?
We'll hold the required number that there isn't now.
And what is the required number?
If you just go and have a look now, this is not complex. Ask yourself how many gang members are in prison now.
I'm asking you, how many gang members are there in prison now?
Well, it depends what you talk about. Are they new
how many gang-affiliated prisoners are there in New Zealand prisons, according to Corrections now?
No one has that record.
Oh, Corrections does. 2,700.
Oh, I thought it more than that.
Whew, the ruffle there. No, Peters sort of thought he had him on the ropes there, didn't he? But then he came back with the exact figure, 2,700. That wasn't even the only time he used this. This is the second time, and this is on... it's actually a one-line promise from New Zealand First, but it says that it will fund residential care for seniors.
Mr. Peters, it is a straight question.
Are you going to keep quiet while I answer the question?
Okay, according to Eldon, the average cost per person is $1,400 a year.
We're not moving on.
So there are currently 865,000 New Zealanders over the age of 65. So if just 10% of the over 65 population receive residential care as per your one-sentence policy, New Zealand First will fund residential care for the aged, the cost to New Zealand taxpayers would be $6.2 billion a year.
It was extraordinary.
Now, Peters wasn't actually going to supply that number, and I suspect he didn't actually have it on him. But he struggled to deliver any of these numbers that Tame was asking for. And at multiple times, he actually simply just turned away from his interviewer and started talking directly into the camera. And it's sort of like what John Campbell noted there, right? He was speaking past his interviewer, except for he wasn't just doing it metaphorically. He was literally doing it. He was speaking to the camera.
Front on.
Yeah, front on.
Is it fair for him to ask politicians these figures when, he clearly has them to hand himself and probably knows that they don't?
Yeah, exactly. So is it a bit tricky? A few people have asked me this, and John Key he once got frustrated at this style of questioning, sort of thought of it as a gotcha and asked for interviewers to give him a heads up if they want to discuss a particular stat. I remember back as well, when the Australian Green Party leader, I think Adam Brandt, he was hailed for telling a reporter to Google it, mate, when he was asked for the current an economic stat. So is it fair to ask politicians to have these stats running in their heads all the time? Maybe not if it's just one of these economic stats. But I do see the worth in what Tame's doing for a few reasons. First, that these are not the current, these are not obscure economic stats that vary day to day. These are the basic underpinning numbers for a lot of major policies that these politicians are touting. So it's not a moving target. They should have it. And if they can't actually name how much their policies are going to cost, like in the instance of the foreign buyers, you should know exactly how many foreign buyers are in the market before they were banned from the market, because that will impact on your projections for 2023 or 4. And so it's actually kind of a measure of basic competence. Does a politician know what they're talking about? I think most importantly, it catches politicians when they're trying to fudge and obfuscate, because I think a lot of these figures, they are awkward. They call some of the policies into question. And so politicians try to get out of saying them because they know that they will make them look a little bit shaky. And so they say, oh, I don't have it, or I'll get back to you. Maybe they do have it and they just don't want to say it. And Tame shows that these figures are actually easily accessible, not just for the person touting these policies, but for a sufficiently motivated interviewer. And in doing so, I think he implies that the politicians who don't have them or say they don't have them, there might be a bit of willfulness in their ignorance there. And I think that's worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, speaking of politicians being elusive, Christopher Luxon has received some criticism for ducking out of interviews.
Yeah, Māori media in particular has had a difficult time getting hold of the National Party leader. He's turned down an interview with Mihingarangi Forbes on RNZ's Mata, Moana Maniapoto for Te Ao with Whakaata Māori, well, on Te Whakaata Māori, Te Ao with Moana on Whakaata Māori. Now, another interviewer who's had a hard time pinning Luxon down is Stuff's Tova O'Brien. So on her election podcast, Tova, she said Luxon's team has turned them down 3 times, and she issued this reproach for the national leader.
At least we're in good company. Christopher Luxon is also refusing to do interviews with Mihingarangi Forbes for Mata and Moana Maniapoto on Te Ao. But come on, Luxon! Everyone else is speaking to us. We've all talked to Chris Hipkins already. Let us give you balance. Come speak to our audiences. They're voters too. They have a right to hear from you. What's your problem? Don't be so luxadaisical.
Luxadaisical. Heck, well, that's some scripting there. The spin-off's Gone by Lunchtime also has been turned down, apparently. They published a story today saying they're willing to be grouped together with all of those other media and interview Luxon simultaneously. So that's one solution there if it's a timing issue.
So Chris Luxon also was accused of being a chicken for pulling out of the press leaders debate. That was the leaders debate in Christchurch that Chris Hipkins was going to do via Zoom ultimately.
Yeah, well, there's a few different permutations that people went through there. The Labour said Alfred Grant Robertson is a stand-in. National said that's a lie. Then the Press's editor, Kamala Hayman, confirmed that Labour had offered Robertson as a stand-in. It's all a big drama. Yeah. Look, if I was a cynical person, I'd say I suspect Luxon's advisors don't see a whole bunch of upside and quite a lot of potential downside in some of these interviews and debates. When you're sitting ahead in the polls, perhaps it's better to just say as little as possible until the voting is done and not trip over on a tree root at the last second. And look, I might be cynical, but thankfully I'm not alone in having such a gnarled and twisted soul. In her politics bulletin for the New Zealand Herald, Audrey Young also mused that Luxon's reason for refusing to front the debate might be because he has every reason to avoid another debate, and it's not because he's a weaker debater, but when you're ahead in the campaign, there is no good reason to give your opponent the chance of getting ahead. In other words, you have the lead, play defence. In football parlance, park the campaign bus.
Which is at least understandable, isn't it? It makes sense.
Yeah, you can understand the political calculus behind it, for sure, but it's not great. And this might sound a little highfalutin, but from the perspective of democratic accountability, and I think particularly when it comes to those Māori media outlets, it's concerning because National has a number of policies which will have a material impact on Māori. It intends to commission the Māori Health Authority for one. It's signalled opposition to co-governance, and if Luxon refuses to front up to Māori media, predominantly Māori audiences, that can leave the impression that National wants to implement these changes without explaining them to the people that they affect the most.
Well, it's certainly good to see Chris Luxon front up to the hui.
Yeah, and it's worth noting he did front up to Julian Wilcox on the hui, and he was pressed on several matters. And I think we'll just play the first of them. But this is Julian Wilcox questioning Luxon on National's commitment to do away with the Māori Health Authority.
All the research says that this will work. And we come through a values base to say we believe in localism and devolution, and we believe in powering up community organisations, iwi organisations, Māori education, health providers, do the lot. But we want one coherent governance of public services, and within that we can have certainly innovation to be able to deliver and deploy services so that we get results. I am obsessed on results and outcomes, and I see a government that focuses on... Even though the research and the researchers and the academics and the GPs and the Māori Health Service are saying the outcomes will be achieved under the current system, you're still saying that your way's better. I think we can power up Māori health providers and do a good job.
Yeah, there was an interesting segment in the interview as well that I thought I'd highlight, and this was Luxon being asked whether he'd rule out one of the potential coalition partner, one of his potential coalition partner ACT's policies, which is holding a referendum on the treaty. So here's that.
Will you commit now, here on the hui, that a referendum on the treaty will not be held under your Prime Minister?
Yeah, it's not our policy, and I think it's actually divisive, and so that's why we don't support it.
Okay, but you can guarantee under your Prime Ministership there will not be a referendum on the treaty?
That's our position as leader of the National Party. That's what I got to say. That's not what I got to say. That's what I believe. As I don't think that's helpful. I think it is divisive, and it's not something we're supportive of.
Okay, I know it's your policy. Yeah. And you can see where I'm going here. I just, the question is fairly clear. If you are to be Prime Minister, you're the one ultimately that will make the call.
I think a referendum on a name change of the country, Aotearoa New Zealand, is something that you'd go forward with.
Quite a strange segue there, because that wasn't really what was being asked. He was being asked about a referendum on the treaty.
Yes.
Now, that's become a bit of a tried and true interview technique for Luxon, where he gets challenged on something that's a bit awkward. He retreats into a slightly safer territory, a prepared line, not quite addressing the question at hand. And I think it had Chris Hipkins in the last News Hub debate just yelling at him, "He won't answer the question. Why won't you answer the question?" I think that does frustrate his opponents, at least, and possibly some media. But we never got a straight answer on whether he'd rule out that ACT policy. But credit to Wilcox, he did get some pretty strong language there. Luxon saying that it was divisive and he wasn't in support of it. And that's pretty strong language. It made other news, and it probably, when it comes down to it, makes it pretty unlikely that we will get that referendum that ACT is proposing.
A lacklustre media debate. Which one was this one?
This was held earlier this week, I think, at the Grayland Library. The debate was almost notable for how media has almost dropped off the agenda. National and ACT didn't even bother to show up. And this is funny because we had the RNZ TVNZ merger, the Public Interest Journalism Fund, all this stuff in the last term. It's all kind of dropped away, and there's nothing like that to come. Maybe just the digital bargaining code to make social media companies pay, and even National doesn't support that. And so Duncan Grieve did a write-up of it. I'd recommend that to you. One of the takeaways was that they barely mentioned TikTok, Facebook or Instagram, and those are really the sources of discontent for media companies as younger audiences move away from mediums like TV and radio, and those social media companies steal their revenue as they see it, or just, get more effective ad dollars spent on them.
Yeah. Remarkable. Actually, I was talking last week about Shane Jones. He's on TikTok, and he got 460,000 views or something.
Oh, it was a good TikTok though from Shane. I do know the one you're talking about. If he doesn't win Northland, he's got a career.
Yes,
he'll be back in Parliament.
And I understand you and Colin have another. You picked out something else that Colin's got
this
wrong.
Is my bi-weekly lambasting of Colin Peacock. He's screwed up again. On Sunday's show, he said that the Food and Grocery Council represents retailers. Not really accurate. It could be interpreted as they represent supermarkets. In fact, they represent suppliers and wholesalers and often go into battle with supermarkets. Mediawatch regrets the error.
Lucky you never make mistakes.
Absolutely, have never done it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You would not be able to find any, and I would not encourage anyone to actually go looking.